Not sure what all the ISOs and shutter speeds in your camera mean? Fear not, because you're going to learn it in this camera user's guide to basic camera settings. The way a camera works is a lot like your eye. It has a lens, like this here, the pupil that controls the amount of light passing, like the aperture, the retina that translates the light into electrical impulses, like the camera sensor here, and then the brain interprets it, like the image processor in the camera. So, kind of the same basic principle. The properties of light are read and conformed into an image. However, with the camera, the images can be saved and is highly controllable. That makes it really powerful if you know how to set the camera settings how you want them. In a camera, there are three main settings that affect the image: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Aperture affects the depth of field. You have probably seen some images like this where only the subject is in focus and everything in front and behind is blurred. So here the depth of field is made very narrow using a low f-stop. When you want only the subject in focus and background blurred, you choose a low f-stop number like f4 or lower. When you want both the foreground and background in focus, you choose a high f-stop number like f11. So low value means little in focus, high value means a lot in focus. It's good to note there are also other things that affect depth of field, like focal length and the distance to the subject. The camera has a shutter, a bit like the eyelids in front of your eyes. Light is captured only for the duration that your eyelids are opened. In a camera, this duration is called shutter speed, and it determines the amount of motion blur. With a long shutter speed, you can record a long movement in the same image. It might be a bit difficult to understand as our eyes don't work that way, but a good example of using long shutter speed is capturing the trails of car lights on a highway. The shutter speed in this photo is multiple seconds, so the light is captured from that entire duration. That's why the lights look like lines. Just remember to have your camera on a steady tripod if you use long shutter speeds, since also the movement of the camera will show in the photo. In most cases though, you want to freeze the action and not show motion blur. To do this, you need to use a short shutter speed, so that you're only capturing a fraction of a second. Then to the last setting, ISO. You could think ISO as the amount of digital amplification of the light the sensor is getting. With the higher and higher ISO values, the camera is boosting the light digitally more and more. This makes it possible to take photos in darker lighting conditions, but makes the image generally worse by introducing image noise and making the colors and dynamic range worse. A photo with high ISO is better than a blurry photo or no photo at all, but try to keep it as low as possible for cleaner images. Now we know about depth of field by aperture, motion blur by shutter speed, and the amplification, as we called it, by ISO. But all of these three settings also affect the exposure, meaning how bright your image is. So using high aperture number to get more depth of field means the photo will get darker. Using short shutter speed to freeze action means the photo will get darker. And using low ISO to get cleaner images does the same. Taking a photo is a balance between these traits. If you want to change any of these up, it means that you need to balance it by changing some of the other ones to stay in the same exposure. Let's try what we learned. We have a wonderful model, Rosa Maria here, and we want to take a portrait of her. I have set my camera to manual mode so that I can control all of the three key settings: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. First, I need to think how much depth of field I want. On portraits, usually you want your subject isolated from the background, so you will choose a low f-stop number. Low f-stop means the area of focus is shallow, remember? Then I would choose the shutter speed. I don't want any motion blur in the image, so I choose a high enough shutter speed. But how high should you go? It depends on plethora of factors, like how much your subject moves, your focal length, lens sharpness, how steadily you can hold the camera, if the camera has stabilization, and the resolution. So it can be hard to calculate the exact number. But you know what? You can just try and learn what works for you in different scenarios. I will start from 1/100th of a second. She's super sharp. I wonder if I can go half of that, 1/50th of a second. Still sharp enough. Can I half it again? At 1/25th of a second, I start to see some motion blur. So let's go back to 1/50th and remember to monitor if we need to raise it higher. Every time I change the shutter speed, I also change the ISO. So every time I halve the shutter speed, I halve the ISO. If the photo is too dark, raise the ISO. If it's too bright, lower the ISO. If you can't lower it enough, then make the shutter speed higher. So what I did was first choose a low f-stop to make the depth of field narrow. I chose f2.8. Then fast enough shutter speed so I don't see motion blur, 1/50th of a second, and then I adjusted the brightness with ISO. Start with the setting that is most important to control in your situation and adjust the other settings accordingly. The lens choice also has a big impact on the photo. Here we have different kinds of lenses from wide angle to telephoto, and they all make a different kind of image. There are two important attributes in a lens that you can read from the markings on the side of the lens. You can find the largest aperture you can set the lens to. On this lens it's 1.4. The low number means that I can take photos in darker lighting conditions and make the depth of field shallow. You can also find the focal length expressed in millimeters that tells how wide field of view the lens captures. With the wider lens like this 24mm, you can capture more of the surroundings. And with the telephoto lens like this 70-200 zoom, you can focus on your subject and see faraway objects closely. I know all of this is too much to comprehend at once, but I have some good news for you. In most situations, your camera can make all or some of these decisions for you quite well by using auto modes. Whenever you feel you don't want to mess with all the settings and just want to capture the moment, it's okay to put your camera on auto. But the camera really doesn't know every time what kind of image you want to take. So if you're interested in making your photos better, try to learn how you can influence the results by controlling the aperture, shutter speed and ISO. If this video was interesting, leave a like and subscribe to The Camera User to see more videos like this.